All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to MiSC Society Podcast. My name is Tally.
I'm Ishti.
And I'm Hubert.
And today we're joined by a very special guest. So if you're a science student here at the University of Manitoba, chances are you've had her for at least one of your classes.
We're joined by the one and only Diana Mlinar, who teaches courses in biology, biochemistry, and microbiology.
And she's especially known for her special fourth-year course in infectious diseases around the world.
We're really excited to talk about her journey into science, her experiences teaching, and her insights into the real world and issues about healthcare and infectious disease.
Thank you so much for joining us today and being on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
So I think it's fair to say that you're a very well-known instructor amongst the science students, although somehow Hubert has made it through his whole genetics degree without ever taking a single course of yours.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure out how that happened.
I guess I've just been flying under the radar, but every time I've taken like a course that you teach, Micro 1, Biochem 1, it's always, I always have this time slot of the other professor. So it's not that I don't want to take your class, it's just the timing just never worked out.
I wouldn't judge you either way.
All right, so jokes aside, it's not that just students know you. You also seem to know many students and are able to connect with them. How do you go on about doing that?
I think I'm just genuinely interested. It's a really cool attribute of my job to be able to interact with so many different students from different backgrounds and different interests and, different cultures. It's really something I count myself very fortunate for, and I do take a genuine interest to know what they're interested in, where their plans will take them, what they end up doing when they're done. I always tend to keep in touch with a lot of students, and it's really cool to see them go on and achieve success.
How do you remember all of their names and faces?
That's just a my brain thing. It kind of does it on its own, and it's it's easy. Yeah,
it's very impressive. Let's just say that.
And looking back, so we know you've taught like so many students here, but also it's kind of like a bit of a full circle moment because you were once also a student here at the University of Manitoba. So looking back, how did you first become interested in science, and kind of what led you to specifically into the field of microbiology?
Well, I took science in high school at the level that it was elective, and in my biology class, which was in grade 11, the teacher that I had taught sort of anatomy and physiology, and I found that the way that she taught, but also the information, was such common sense that I didn't have to study. Like, you would just read it and it just made perfect sense. And it was so fascinating that I decided I wanted more. And so then when I enrolled in science in my first year of university, and then just through progression and courses and what kind of holds your interest, microbiology seemed like the obvious choice, especially because at the time I was starting to develop an interest in infectious disease and this sort of thing.
Yeah, makes sense. When you were in high school, did they give a lot of knowledge about microbiology? Because personally, in my high school, I knew that bacteria existed, but not necessarily how they replicate and so on to do a degree in it.
I don't think there was anything. It was more just very, very general. The teacher that I had would bring in personal stuff. She had twins, for example, so she brought in the DNA that she had from them and that sort of thing. But beyond that, no, there was no microbiology that I can remember at all.
Your teacher brought DNA samples?
So she had them, so because she had twins and because she was, I guess, a nerd like me, she had sent it off for sequencing, like to show that they were identical, and so she shared that with us. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. That's impressive.
I've actually since taught her kids. Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow. Another full circle moment.
Those twins, yeah.
Wow. So we want to talk about one of your very special courses, MBio 4300 Infectious Diseases Around the World, which became one of my most favorite and impactful courses throughout my whole degree. And I know you talk about this in the course itself, but for our listeners who haven't taken the course, do you want to share a little bit about how you created this course, what inspired you, and what your journey was like starting it? Because I know it was a unique story.
It really was. I went to a conference in 2018, and it was on sexually transmitted infection. But there was a lady that presented there, and I believe she was from Uganda, but she had shared in her discussion that there were people within the country that believed that if they were religious, they were just exempt, basically, from acquiring the HIV virus. And of course, from the science-based perspective, it doesn't make sense, but it led me to believe that there's so many things beyond just the science that impact the incidence of disease, the ability to prevent transmission, the ability to treat the disease. And a lot of that stuff probably plays more of a role than the science that we're so familiar with. And so that was my inspiration.
Yeah, and I also really like how real it is. You really emphasize in that class that research alone isn't enough, that there's so many societal and psychological factors that play into it, and whether, like, a lot of countries don't have access to healthcare or vaccines. So it's really great that there's a course out here to teach us about these things with people who might not have exposure to Asia or Africa or Europe or even South America.
Yeah, and I don't think people often think, I mean, I didn't think about it, right? And it was in that moment that she was talking that, you kind of go down these rabbit holes and you start to consider all of the other factors and, just simple things like having clean drinking water or a toilet to go to the bathroom in, and what all this means in terms of the transmission of infection or infectious organisms and viruses. Yeah,
that's right. So when you're teaching this class, has it personally changed your point of view on the world?
Well, the more I prepare, the more I learn. And again, there's things that, sometimes because of the psychology and then the culture and then the religion, and there's things that you would just never consider because it's so far out of anything you'd ever have your own personal experience with. And so the more you learn, it definitely changes. It helps you to understand people better, and it helps you to understand why things happen and how it's so difficult to actually prevent these things from transmitting. And again, our ability to effectively eliminate them is so difficult.
That's right.
Right. I feel like it really opens up your perspective and your eyes to when you look at all these countries and compare them to where we live. And it's not something we think on a day-to-day basis. But taking that course really changed my perspective and exposed me to things that are out there that I didn't even know of. So what would you say are some misconceptions that people have about how diseases are generally spread?
I think, I'm fortunate to teach so many different classes and to so many different levels and different backgrounds and things of the like. And I think even beyond misconception, basic education is lacking. And so you'll see people that have come through the high school system, and you're talking to them and they just have no idea about these things. Or when I used to do STI counseling at a local clinic, right, you'd talk to people before they had their tests done and they didn't know what a condom was or that a condom is responsible for preventing the spread of sexually transmitted infection. So beyond misconception, I think they just literally don't have basic information, and it's difficult without science and a background in science to understand the meaning behind a lot of that stuff.
Right. So it's the lack of education that we really need to prioritize and emphasize in our society. And do you think courses in general I know your course does, but do you think they do a good job with advocating for that throughout someone's science degree?
I think it's so difficult because, again, I'm fortunate. The background and the courses that I teach, you kind of see the big picture. But it's very difficult when you have students from different backgrounds. Like, for example, in my microbiology course, I'll have students that take it as an engineering requirement. And so that's all they're getting. And we do a pretty good job in that class of building concepts, from basic science and, organic chemistry and then moving up to some of the things that you need. But if you don't have enough background or you have a different background, how do you explain things in a way that's meaningful, and easy to digest?
Right. And there's also that sort of a disconnect between what you learn in class and what you actually practice in real life. Because, I'm guilty of it myself, but sometimes I know about microbes and the danger of food contamination and everything. But sometimes I'm like, I'll eat that cookie that dropped to the floor. It's 5 seconds.
The 5-second rule?
Even though I know that's not a real thing. So what do you think is kind of a barrier between what people learn in class and how they practice it in life, basically?
I think sometimes people don't know either, how to practice, the ability to apply that information. I see this again with the way that I teach versus, the way that I see students are set up to learn. Sometimes they don't understand. And if you don't understand, it's really meaningless because you can't apply it. You don't have the tools to put it into practice, and so sometimes it's the way you evaluate the student. Sometimes it's the way you explain it to the student. But all of those things set them up in such a way that they can then take it into their real life, take it into the healthcare profession, and apply the content in the way that it's meant to be applied.
Right. That's so amazing. So You are someone who really advocates for critical thinking in students, as we've heard all before. And that's something you try to instill in your students, even in classes. In a world with so much information, but also misinformation and disinformation, how can students learn to think critically and make informed decisions about health and science? And what does it actually mean when you think critically as a science student in today's modern world?
It's a good question. I don't know if I try, but I mean, sometimes people don't connect the dots, right? And I think sometimes showing somebody, and even when you give an exam where students are asked to apply information, the first time is always difficult. You know, it's something they're not used to. It's uncomfortable. But once you get used to that and that way of thinking, which again comes through practice, comes from the way that it's taught or the way that examples are illustrated, it can kind of open the door to that. And then they become more comfortable to just do it. It becomes natural. You know, it's literally like it was a language that was taught to you, and then you're just fluent in it because you're so accustomed to it.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like students get very caught up in learning the course material or memorizing for the course itself, like especially for biochem and OChem, those kinds of courses, and micro, that you miss the aspect of applying this knowledge and that you can actually use this to your benefit in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually the reason we're here. It's
yeah.
scary that it's lost, but it's the whole point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it really needs to be emphasized more in so many more courses. But I think learning about all of these issues is so important. And again, like Telly said earlier, what stood out to me the most is that research and medical advances are incredibly important, but a lot of these come down to the root cause being larger societal factors. And as students, I think learning about these issues adds so much perspective, but it can also feel overwhelming, and even you can feel a little bit helpless learning all of this because you want to make a difference, but these are global challenges. So how do you go on about that? So what advice would you give to students that are feeling that way, but they actually want to make a difference?
I think start small. The one thing I've learned just through my interaction with students, and you'll have positive and negative interactions, but for the most part, I'm very fortunate. They're almost entirely positive, and you learn that just by leading by example. Doing the right thing. Like, if you go up for promotion, for example, students have to write letters, and so those letters that came through, you're reading about the fact that they appreciate that you have a high moral compass, or you conduct yourself with integrity, and so they learn from that and they watch that. And so I think just setting an example by how you live your life is a really good way to start. And then if they live their life according to similar principles, they can teach other people. And so it seems like a small contribution, but it's almost contagious, and so
it goes a long way from there.
Yeah, those really principles to live by are really they take you a long way in your life. So do you ever find it challenging to kind of balance teaching, for example, in your class, the science aspect, like the microbiology, the mechanisms of the diseases, with the kind of the societal, socioeconomic factors influencing the disease?
I think the way I put the course together, it's organized according to continent, and so it's initially just an overview, because if you consider a continent, right, every country is so different, and you have first world and third world sometimes coexisting together, right, and then there's different culture and different religions, so a general overview, and then to begin to talk about diseases that are most frequently found at different locations there, and then how those things will tie together when appropriate with a socioeconomic factor or a climate factor or whatever. So you just kind of keep reintroducing it as it becomes related to a disease that you're describing.
And when you took this course, or when you created this course, if I remember correctly, you did start traveling to these places to study these diseases, right? Do you want to expand on that part and what happened after that with the... Yeah.
It was interesting. So I put together the proposal, and so it was a sabbatical, and it was granted. And then the idea was that, yes, I would travel and work with infectious disease doctors, and so you'd kind of see it firsthand as they see their patients, and then kind of get information from them, because who better to learn from?
Right.
And also, too, those experiences, like I do spend a lot of time traveling and doing other things, and I find those experiences stay with you so much differently than anything you'd read online, right? And so that's what I wanted. But of course, it was January 2020 that I set out to do this, and so I made it as far as Scandinavia, and then Iceland was, kind of my next stop, and I went. But the infectious disease doctor there was just so overwhelmed because they had their first case. It was a traveler that was coming in from Australia, and with a population of 360,000 people, if it was going to be what they thought it could be, it would have been serious harm. And
Very
so it was,
serious,
it was very scary. And my flight, because I was coming home briefly, I can't remember, March 12th maybe or 13th.
Oh, wow. Right in the middle of...
The person at the airport told me that they called it a pandemic because they were avoiding the word for the longest time. And so, I had no idea until that person told me. I'm like, oh, okay, so this is different now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this course, you teach students, but what about spreading the word to people who are not students, are not in university, and able to communicate non-scientifically, and being able to advocate for these issues and making sure that people actually understand what is going on around that? What is a good way to do that? What can students do, or even professors can do to spread the word?
It's challenging because you have the different backgrounds. I'll always tell people when we're talking about it, if you don't know what a protein is, it's very difficult. Like, where do you start? Toxemia, or you're talking about how to denature a protein with acid or with heat, to compromise a microorganism's ability to survive. Like, it's very difficult. So you have to find, a set of language and terms that are going to be easily accessible to everybody, and then hopefully, relay that adequately, that it'll stick with them, and it'll change what they're doing. But we see it all the time. I mean, people going to the doctor and demanding an antibiotic for what's obviously a viral infection. Like, they don't know. No matter how much they don't know, you can't convince them otherwise sometimes. It's a scary situation.
And another thing that you do talk about in class is that even doctors and professionals who should have all that knowledge, because there's so much to know and so much to remember, they might not remember everything, right?
Well, different backgrounds, if you haven't had that type of training, and you've been... you see in medical school, they don't learn microbiology. They don't have time for that. And you don't need to take it as an elective. So you can be going through that program without ever having learned about it. And, now you're learning systems, and you're learning how the system works, and those kinds of drugs that are not for infectious disease. Whereas to do nursing, you do have to take a microbiology course. It's mandatory.
When you first said, I didn't know that was a thing. Like, I didn't know that wasn't a requirement. Like, you would think basic microbiology is at least one of the requirements to practice medicine. So when I learned that was absolutely shocking. And considering it is for nursing, I think something needs to be added or shifted to accommodate for that.
It's scary.
Right. And then, so that's in the context of like real world, right? We understand that there's a lot of socioeconomic factors. But hypothetically, what is like, if you could change one thing about like how society approaches infectious diseases, what would it be? And kind of building on top of that, what is something you hope students will remember years after taking like your class?
I think, I'm not sure if I'm addressing the question properly, but education for me is so important, because I'll just use as an example, like vector transmission, right? And maybe not even necessarily where we live, but in other places, if people understood, dengue, yellow fever, Zika, right, plasmodium, and all of those things that can be spread in that way, right? They can, behavioral modifications, mosquito nets, long clothing, right? Different insecticides and things like that can go such a long way. And so I'm a really big advocate for the educational piece. And then you can share that education, right? You can spread it to your family, to your friends, and it becomes something that just kind of gains steam on its own.
Right. So we had a lot of very scientific-based conversation just now. And so I want to move to something a little bit lighter. So since you were once a U of M student, I know you have shared your experiences in some courses like biochemistry and organic chemistry. What would you say is the biggest difference you see in students now versus back then?
Yeah. So I always tell students, and it's meant as a joke, but also a reality. Like, we used to have to wait in the science library to access a book to find the melting point of aspirin. And this is reality. And it's interesting. We also had labs with all of our courses, and, you'd have to take all of these things, and you'd have a lab exam and a lecture exam. And so now everything has become much more thin, if I may. So, you don't have your lab in your course any longer. Everything is online. Right. You can Google things. And the capabilities of the students, I've found, have decreased quite a bit, which I think proves the point that if you offer too much, it actually does harm. Right. That would be the biggest.
Do you think that a lot of people say that after the pandemic, students who were in high school during that time are not as capable as, let's say, students beforehand. Would you say you agree with that?
I've seen some things. I mean, it was very different, and I was just talking about this in disease the other day. I was discussing a situation with the implementation of electronic medical records on the East Coast and how they're trying to do it too quickly. And you'll have people, for example, that are older with an old school way of doing things that are, might not be ready to retire. I think it was like 30% of the doctors. I mean, you lose so much when people don't already have a family doctor as it is. It was the same idea. You're in a high school and the teacher doesn't know about, online things and this sort of thing. They just kind of threw in the towel. And, some who did know still did the same thing. And so you're getting students with such different backgrounds, different quality of high school education, even where there should have been more uniformity, it's not there. And so those students suffer. Again, it was harm that was done to them that was beyond their control, but now they have to swim in the same ocean with all the others. So
that's right.
Definitely studying in the pandemic online was a struggle for me.
Yeah, it definitely shifted things. And I don't think we've found that balance back yet. But we need to. It's something that needs to be done. But moving on to some lighter questions now. If you weren't a professor and if you weren't teaching all of these microbiochem courses, what would you be doing?
It's a good question. It's also something that changes regularly. Like my kick lately is structural engineering because I think it's the coolest thing in the world.
Wow.
Well, it's just fascinating, right? And it's, I guess, kind of like tissues in the body, right? Like concrete has different properties, different types, right? And wood. It's fascinating. And it makes, when you learn this stuff, it makes you so independent, autonomous, and capable. And it spills over into all other areas of your life. And I love that attribute. So it's, like I said, always different, but that's my current.
So right now, if you weren't a prof, you would be an engineer.
Well, I also really like law. So that's something that it's like a side hobby of mine. So it's,
I think it's like a shift of paradigm comes from all these like interdisciplinary, when people take different disciplines together and have a shift in perspective, and that's when innovation happens. So that's amazing that you're interested in so many different things. So what does your day-to-day look like as an instructor of U of M with not just one, but not two, but I can't even count how many courses each term that you teach?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm a high energy person, and I thrive under conditions where I'm forced to kind of be sharp. Whereas if I'm just doing one or two, I'm not interested. Like it's just not enough for me to have to manage things at that level. And so you just kind of come and you teach your classes the day before you're preparing and adjusting lectures and things of the like, setting exams, setting assignments, marking things, answering emails, meeting with students. There's always something. I provide a lot of support to my students, too, whenever they require. So there's, personal circumstances or, there's emotional things that come up from time to time. And so I'm always there for that. And so you're always busy with something, but it's always like a nice mix, and which is how I prefer it.
That's amazing. I do want to ask, how do you mark your exams so insanely quickly?
I think I have it's probably not a normal thing, but I have a lot of guilt when there's something that needs to get done that I'm not doing. Mm-hmm. So it's to my own advantage to just sit down and hammer them out. But then also I'm curious to know how my students have done. And as a student, I wanted to know fast. And so I find I appreciate that. I assume the students mostly do as well. So, everybody wins when you get them done quickly.
Definitely do, yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So speaking of hobbies, I've heard that you mentioned in some of your lectures before that you have a pilot's license. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
I do. When I was little, I mean, I've liked airplanes my whole life, but I always thought I would do a license. I always just assumed it would be when I retired because it takes time, and I never even considered it as a career option. But when I was teaching biochem, as was years ago, in the summer, I had a lot of time. Like I was running the lab and the lecture, and then when the lab was done, summer, it goes super late, right? You have daylight hours for a long time, so I was able to get it done while I was teaching. But it started because I would fly up north once a week to teach in Norway House, and the plane that we were on was called a Metroliner, and so they don't have doors, and so I'd sit right in the front seat. And I could watch everything they were doing. And so I taught myself, when they would drop the gear. And I taught myself the TCAS systems. And shortly thereafter, I was in a plane. And then I hammered that out. And
wow.
Yeah.
That's something that's a very fun fact of yours that you say very casually into lectures sometimes. And I think some
It's a
people
little trivia, like a little cool trivia. Yeah.
It's my passion for sure. Like, and again, the science, right?
Right.
You don't realize, but the physics and it was just,
Right,
it's fascinating.
yeah.
And this is something that you can't just get in a day. This is like a multiple year commitment, right?
It was, initially, I think when I had first started, it was winter. And so you can only do it till 4 when you're first learning. And so I postponed it till the spring. But it wasn't bad. I think, I don't remember. I did my flight test and everything like July 30th. So it wasn't terrible. It was just a private license. But if you do commercial, it's a bit longer.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think you would ever want to become a pilot for a commercial company or no?
But there's a lot of time away, which I'm not like. I like being home, but at the same time, it definitely it's a passion in ways that people probably will never understand. Like I love it, and so it's always a thing. And when you have the one license, it's easy to get the other, and so I wouldn't put it off the table just yet.
Right.
Every so often you'll get like the itch. So.
All right. So now moving on to a very exciting part. MiSC and Match.
So we're gonna ask you some questions. This is like a rapid fire round of questions. No overthinking. Answer with the first thing that comes to mind. Okay, I'll start. Do you prefer coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Early mornings or late nights?
Both.
What's your favorite class that you teach?
Biochemistry.
I guess teaching microbiology or teaching biochemistry.
Biochemistry.
Yeah.
If you didn't live here, where would you live?
Calgary.
What is your favorite place to travel to?
Banff.
Teaching first years or fourth years?
Both.
Marking papers or exams?
Exams.
All right, you were very quick with it. Our previous viewers had to think about it, but you know your stuff. All right. Uh-oh. Contamination
alert.
All right, so it's time to hear about our microbe of the week.
This week, it's actually a virus.
This week's microbe is human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV.
Which is a virus that attacks the immune system, specifically the CD4 T cells.
And if untreated, it can progress to AIDS, making individuals much more vulnerable to other infections.
And what's really interesting is that while HIV is pretty well understood scientifically, its impact globally is heavily shaped by societal factors like access to healthcare, education, and stigma.
And we also know that you studied HIV during your master's.
So we wanted to ask, what drew you to studying HIV? And is there anything kind of from your research or experience that really stood out for you?
I think initially it was probably Kevin Coombs. So Dr. Coombs taught the virology course, and it's interesting. But then also the impact on the human population, something that, because viruses can infect a lot of different organisms, but the fact that it causes such disruption to the immune system and obviously impacts that person's quality of life, or can anyways if it's not treated, that was very interesting for me. And so to learn about that together, the virus, the factors, the immune factors, and then the physiological factors as well.
Right.
Yes.
And you're still very passionate about it, even though your master's was not recent. And so it's really great that you're still advocating for it. And for example, I've taken some classes with you where HIV is not necessarily a topic, but you're still able to tie it in and really advocate the scientific knowledge about it. So I think that's very cool and impressive.
I think it's like a prime example of one of those diseases where you can tie in so many other factors. So it's great that you do that. And we appreciate how much you advocate for these things as students.
As someone who really likes immune system, HIV is definitely one of the pathogens up there that I really like to study. All right, so it looks
likes
like
the immune system too.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so it looks like we are nearing the end of our episode. So if you're listening live, we just want to remind you we currently have a bake sale going on with ice cream and baked goods happening right now in front of the SSA Lounge in the ARMS second floor.
This time we're raising money for the Ronald McDonald Charity House, so be sure to stop by and make a difference by treating yourself without feeling guilty, because it's for a great cause.
And we're also hosting a microbiology final exam study night happening next week. So if you're in microbiology courses and getting ready for finals, this is a great chance to review content, ask questions, and study alongside other students.
So that's all we have for you today, and we want to give you a huge thank you to joining us here for our third episode, and we're so honored to have you as our guest for our podcast.
It was so great to hear your experience, advice, and perspectives firsthand. And I think you're a very well-known professor across the life sciences. And this is going to be a very popular episode among the students.
Thank you for having me.
And we really do appreciate, again, you taking the time out of your busy schedule with everything's going on. And this is exactly what we want to do with our podcast. So thank you again.
It's my pleasure.
So thank you so much for tuning in with us for our third MiSC Society Podcast episode.
We will see you all next week, and remember to stay curious,
Stay connected,
And stay cultured.